Okay, now I'd like to welcome you and welcome the panel members to the second part of the career-related part today. As you heard already, I'm John Ericson from the Outreach Unit in New York, in Human Resources. And I would like to ask all the panel members to introduce themselves. So, Ian, if you don't mind reintroducing yourself.
I don't
very
think
briefly.
so. I think we did it already, so
okay.
I'll pass.
Okay, well, Ian, I think all of you heard him this morning, so you're well familiar with his background. And Wasim has just introduced himself, so I'm glad that Ian and Wasim are here to join us again, giving us different perspectives on working for the UN. And if you don't mind, Alex, introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Alex Buskie. I work at the United Nations Association of the UK, the headquarters, and I'm the Responsibility to Protect Programme Officer there.
And Nicky, please.
Hi, I'm a recent intern at the United Nations Regional Information Centre in Brussels, and currently a temporary proofreader at the International Maritime Organization,
Which is also part of the UN family of organizations. Now, as you can see, we have a whole spectrum of experience here, starting with Ian, Wasim, to include myself, of many years of exposure and work for the UN, and we have our young members here who are starting their careers in the international arena. So it's a wide spectrum, which will, I think, be very helpful in understanding how one moves through the UN system. So if I could start with Ian, how did you get involved? Let's start with your education. What did you study? Because we have students in the audience. Let's see.
No, sure. I'm happy to answer the question. I'll tell you in advance, there's not going to be any help to you. I came out of university having studied history and economics with an interest in development, and I went off to work in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh in the field of development. Now I find it very hard to answer even the question before we get to the UN, you know, what led me to work in the field of human rights, because I moved from development to human rights, and probably the answer to that is my encounter with mass atrocity in Bangladesh in 1971, because I was working in the last year of undivided Pakistan and the first year of independent Bangladesh. I was in Dhaka on the 25th of March 1971, and the Pakistan Army began committing mass atrocities, including genocide directed at the Hindu population. Well, you know, fast forward, that interest, my interest in Asia led me to join Amnesty as head of the Asia region, and I became its Secretary General. Amnesty, as I said this morning, engaged very strongly and seriously with the UN in many ways. I mean, obviously with the UN human rights system, but also with the political departments of the UN, because human rights issues are always in a political context. So I came to know those people in the Secretariat who were perhaps themselves most committed on human rights issues. And this was still days of the Cold War, only the Cold War just ending, so the controversy around human rights and the acceptability of people with human rights backgrounds was not as ready as it is happily today. But I mean, that's simply those sort of personal contacts simply led not to my deciding on a career at the UN or looking for one, but being asked to assist initially with the planning of the human rights mission in Haiti. And from then on, the question best be answered by saying one thing led to another. I've never become a continuous UN employee. I've always been a mission employee. 2 points though. I mean, the point of what, John, you've already said that I want to echo most strongly is to think in terms of getting experience in the field, or at the level where the rubber hits the road, as it were. It's probably no good in most cases making a beeline for headquarters. That's very hard to do anyway. But also, frankly, what headquarters needs is people bringing the experience from the field. Now, of course, catch-22 there is that in order to be employed in the field, people want you to have field experience. So how do you get your first field experience? And that's one of the hardest questions to answer. It may be with the UN, maybe some opportunities. And I also want to to advocate very strongly at some point in careers taking a hard look at the United Nations Volunteer Programme, because that is an excellent programme. And I have worked with the largest contingent in East Timor United Nations volunteers, and in Haiti, Rwanda, and Nepal, I've had excellent UN volunteers. But it's dangerous to regard the UN volunteer programme as simply an entry point for a UN career, because it is supposed to carry with it the ethos of volunteering, and not the moment you've arrived in the UN context to start looking for a permanent job. But UNVs are professionals, and if they're not, at least they should be treated as professionals as much as other staff members. Plane, go to a country where you want to be engaged, knock on the doors of NGOs, national or international, and sooner or later, much more likely than if you're writing letters or sending emails from Edinburgh or London, you may begin to find the ways to make a contribution and begin to acquire the experience that later on can make you an attractive candidate to one bit or another of the UN. So I think I'll leave it there to begin with.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. And just to add on to what a UN volunteer is and how to think about it. UN Volunteer, UNV, is an organization run by UNDP, development program based in Bonn. All volunteers work in the field. Currently, the international volunteers have to be at least 25, that's the minimum age. They have to have at least 2 years work experience to work in the field. There's no upper age limit. And you must commit yourself to at least 12 months of being a volunteer, at least as far as working in the Secretariat peacekeeping operations. Because as Ian rightly said, UNV does not want to be a recruitment arm of the Secretariat or of any organization. Volunteering should be an end in itself, but having said so, it leads often to a UN career. Why? Because you have the experience, you have the credibility based on your field experience. So that is a really great leg up on others who do not have that. And as a volunteer, you have worked side by side with regular UN staff. You've done much the same work. And then after at least 12 months, you have the opportunity to apply for a UN staff position, but not in that same duty station. That is the rule. We have currently 3,000 UN volunteers in peacekeeping. UN volunteers don't only work for the Secretariat, they work for UNICEF, UNDP, UNHCR, WFP. All the field-based organizations have volunteers working for them. So if you want to work for the UN, you could be a volunteer at some point. There is now a brand new type of volunteering called the youth volunteers. It is so new that I cannot say too much about it because we don't have a track record. But that is for people ages 18 to 29. And you would also be sent to the field, not peacekeeping at this point, but UNICEF, for example, or other offices in the field. So if you are between 18 and 29, you could look up this program and see if you could join that. If you're over 25, of course, you can always join the international the international volunteer program, but you do need work experience, and the average age is not 25, of course, it's about 38 or so among the regular volunteers. But the youth volunteer program is something you may want to look at. So anyway, I'll leave it there, and I'd like to ask Wasim what you studied and how you ended up in the international arena.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I studied economics at university, and you guys are already way ahead of me, because when I was studying at university, I didn't have an international career in mind at all. It wasn't even on my horizon, it wasn't on my radar to any degree that working in an international organisation like the UN could probably be a possibility. I ended up, but when I was an undergraduate, I quickly came to the realisation that I really didn't want to work in the private sector. I didn't want to go off to the City of London and become a banker. I think my mother still regrets it, but okay. It may have been a bad move, but that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something that was far more interesting, exciting, and able to give back to the country. And so I ended up, amongst other things, I applied for lots of civil society organisations, but I ended up getting into the UK civil service. So I worked for the Department of Education, and like Ian's career, one thing led to another. I ended up being commissioned from there, and then ended up in the Foreign Office. And curiously, the Foreign Office is something that I've never absolutely thought about working. I always thought the Foreign Office is a very elitist organisation, full of probably people who are aristocrats. It is, but it's not only that. It's not only that. It's actually a great place. It's actually a great place to work, and you know, I'm here to plug the UN. Like, you know, give the SEO a look as well. As a great place to operate within, you know, SEO and DFID, two kind of international parts of financial government. And from there, I've gradually worked more and more in kind of multilateral work, including going out and working with the UN. So I think, you know, the key message from my career is, you know, don't be too fixed on planning what you're going to be doing, and don't be too worried if that plan doesn't work out immediately. But, you know, do keep in mind where you want to go to and the kind of work you want to do. And if you are committed to doing international work, the UN actually isn't the only place to start, and it's not the only place where you can get that kind of experience. I think Ian's already talked about civil society organisations, NGOs. They're often working in partnership with the UN on the ground in all these countries in the field, and they're the places that can offer you really, you know, vital experience. Government as well can offer you really vital experience. I think the key thing to think about is, you know, like any employer, the UN is pretty much like any employer. When it's looking for people to work for it, it's looking for the most talented people who've got the best skill sets to match its needs. So you've got to think about how you build up your skills if the UN is your ultimate career goal, and that may not immediately be in the organization.
No? You're welcome to continue, but
no.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to answer questions later.
Yes, we will come to questions definitely later, but thank you, Wasim. And I'd like to turn to Alex to bring the youth perspective on what she studied and how she ended up working with the UN in the UK.
Okay, so I studied politics and French at Glasgow University, and I did a year abroad while I was there for my French degree. I went to McGill University in Montreal to study French better. And when I graduated from Glasgow, I decided to go back to Montreal because I just really wanted to be fluent in French, and the city was great. And there were a couple of opportunities that looked interesting. So I managed to get an internship at a research institute that looked at genocide prevention and R2P, and it was something that I had already studied at Glasgow University. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll go for this internship. And I just was very well timed. Things in your career can sometimes just be timing, right place, right time. So I got this internship, but then the assistant to the director of that institute actually left after I'd arrived, and they offered me that job. So I part-time interned and part-time worked at the same place for 2 years, looking specifically at R2P kind of policy and Canadian foreign policy, how the Canadian government was actually implementing R2P both nationally and internationally. And then I was going to move back to London to do a master's at King's College London, and I just saw a job opportunity at UNA UK focusing exactly on R2P, and really just basically it was the job I was doing in Canada but in the UK at a bit of a higher level, like a step above. So I applied and managed to get the job, and that's where I am now.
Okay.
Shorter.
Good. Thank you, Alex. And let's turn to Nicky to tell us what you studied and how you went to the UN from there.
Well, I started off at King's College London studying war studies, which is an international relations and politics degree. And throughout studying it, nearly everyone's reaction was, well, what do you do with war studies? And it was really a degree that I did because I was completely invested in the subject. I thought it was interesting, it was politics, it was sociology. But at the end of it, I did come to get to, what about conflict prevention? What about international development? These are bigger global issues today. And so I started looking for internships in charities. One thing led to another. I got to UNA UK, communications. I networked, I met loads of great people. And absolutely by chance, one day I got a phone call saying, how about an internship at UNRIC, which is the United Nations Regional Information Centre in Brussels. I sent in my CV, they went, great, you're fantastic, move over for 4 months. And just like Alex, some things just fall into place. And I only just finished in December, but if anyone ever says to you, what do you do with IR, what do you do with politics, there are opportunities. You just have to put yourself out there and network.
Okay, thank you, Nicky. Briefly, just my academic background in social science, and then a Master of Public Administration. So you heard, again, we have different academic backgrounds. We started in different ways. There's always this issue of opportunity scan, of timing. You know, keep your eyes and ears open for the opportunities that may arise. And the opportunities may not be perfect in the beginning, but as everybody's been saying, one thing leads to the other. And in my case too, I started at the very bottom of the UN hierarchy because I needed a job. I was answering telephones from 3:30 to 7:30 in the afternoon in Vienna in the beginning, and holding a job as a teacher in the morning. And eventually I took the competitive exam that we've been talking about, and things started taking off from there. There are some years where you have several job offers within the UN, other years where there's a drought, and you try and you're not able to get what you want. I tried to go to several other peacekeeping missions, Namibia, Somalia, Central African Republic, but was denied. So you got to keep trying, and hopefully things will work out at some point if you are willing and enthusiastic enough. So you've heard that there are different ways of joining. As a young person, you can try an internship. Actually, there's one question already I can answer on internships, because I'm actually the person in the Secretariat in charge of internship policy. And we have just changed the internship policy. And in the past, you had to be a full-time student in a master's or PhD degree program to be an intern. So you had to be a student at the time of your internship. What we've just changed, and I'm talking about a few days ago, we changed this. After 3 years of trying, sometimes things take time to get through the system, but we finally made it. Now, you could also be in the final year of your bachelor's, if you want to be an intern. Or you could have already graduated from a bachelor's, master's, or PhD or equivalent program, and as long as you commence your internship within a year of having graduated, you can still join us as an intern. So this will help UK-based students, because I know many master's programs are 1 year, and you don't have time for a 2-month internship in the UN. But if you have time after you've graduated, this is an opportunity now. And I promise you, this is just, I think it was issued on something like the 24th of January. It's a few days ago, this new policy. So you may be in the right place at the right time already if you were interested in being an intern. And I'm not talking only about New York, I'm talking about any UN duty station that is so-called family duty station, meaning it's safe enough and has the right facilities for sort of normal lifestyle. So I'd like to go back to the panel members and ask them a different kind of question. So if we start with Ian again, when you look back at how you started, what was in a sense your biggest mistake, or what would you do differently if you could do it over again, as far as getting into the UN is concerned? Not about personal things, but as far as getting into the UN.
I'd learn languages, and I think it's worth focusing on that a moment. All of your brain cells are dying by now, and it's already difficult to learn additional languages. You should have started earlier. I can only work in English. My English is quite good, but beyond that, and I told the system I shouldn't be the Special Representative Secretary General in Libya, because that should be someone Arabic speaking, and I made sure I bowed out. So, there's no question that language skill is going to enhance opportunities. You can plumb for a language that is a world language, French, Spanish, Arabic, or you can plumb for a really obscure language. The UN recruited every Khmer speaker in the world to go and work in Cambodia. There aren't that many of them. But I'm quite serious. I think if you have the opportunity, but foreign office is a good way of enforcing their languages too, right? So that's worth saying, because certainly my usefulness in the field is limited to to countries either where you operate in English or where they don't really expect you to know the local language. Yeah, and as I say, I never set out to have a UN career, and I think I would, despite the theme of this panel, this session, urge people not to think so much in terms of a UN career as in terms of doing something, doing useful things that may bring you to the UN, not necessarily assuming that it's the first rung, you're aiming for the first rung of a continuous ladder, because that's probably not the way that most people end up being most useful. I've done a lot of recruitment of people, particularly human rights officers, but political officers and other categories of personnel. What do I look for? I look for, expertise and experience within the particular area, obviously. But I'm probably looking more for practical expertise than I am for academic expertise. So I don't spend too long in continuously in university. I'm certainly looking for personality in terms of particularly the ability to contribute to an organisation as part of a team, not some brilliant, ambitious solo player. And of course, looking for commitment, which is being motivated not primarily by careerist considerations or the particular grade or rank of the job that you're going for, but the real desire to fit yourself into somewhere where you know you can make a contribution.
Thank you, Ian. Wasim, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, can I just echo some of those? So I work for Foreign, and I'm quite fortunate that when I get posted somewhere, often they provide me language skills, language training. So at the moment I'm spending 5 months, I've got a month into 5 months of trying to learn Portuguese before going out to Brazil. And it's bloody difficult, that's all I can say. So I think Ian did touch on a very important point, that if you learn languages, it's better when you're younger. And as you get to middle age, as I'm very much into middle age now, it becomes a lot harder. So learning those language skills early on is really important. But I think the other thing I'd say is, and this does become harder as well, I think, we've talked a lot about field experience here, and actually, that's when I was working as a member state, talking to people in the UN Secretariat, the people who did have credibility, the people who made things happen, were the people who could draw out what was happening in the field, people who had a real field experience. So when we were there negotiating how UN peacekeeping missions should work, we wanted to hear from the people on the ground, and they're the people who could convince you. And I think it's getting as much of that field experience as early as possible is something you should look to be doing, getting out there. It does become, an international career also has downsides, and one of the downsides is that having a field career probably becomes harder as you get older. Being mobile becomes harder as you get older because you have more responsibilities with kids, with parents, etc. So try and get that international experience in as early as possible. And then the final thing I'd say, I've done a lot of, I feel really old now, but I've done quite a lot of jobs, and the ones which, looking back, have been worth doing, so the ones where I've done stuff that I've been really passionate about. And those aren't necessarily the areas that career terms have been the best jobs, they're not necessarily the place to be. So, but the ones you look back and think, wow, I really did that, and I really enjoyed that, and the ones where you're doing something that's really, really exciting for you and means something to you personally. So try and look towards areas which you're passionate about, which you can really feel proud about working in, because you'll probably do a lot better there than in a high-ranking bureaucratic position.
Okay, thank you, Wasim, and Alex and Nicky, you're so young, I don't know if you have anything to regret yet. If you'd like to.
Yeah, it's still working out really. One thing I would say is I have a double-edged sword in which I have specialised extremely early, and I know a lot about RTP, and I know a lot about its development and how it's being implemented or not, as we saw this morning in the debate. But that's a good way of getting your foot in the door, but then I also feel like I need to expand my knowledge a lot more, and I'm already almost 4 years into a career in just RTP, and it feels like I need to expand more. So I think it's a good way to get in, but then be aware of the fact that you've got to
I'm just going to add, it's about almost 3 years since I graduated, and during my undergrad I thought I was the busiest person in the world, and I absolutely wasn't. Like, what my biggest regret is not just simply volunteering locally, outside of London in your local community. Work experience is absolutely vital. If languages isn't your thing, get as much experience wherever it is, and nothing is a waste of time, even if it's envelope stuffing for your local MP, or doing the shopping for the local elderly people down your street. Things like that make a massive impact on your CV, and also it's the sort of stuff that even 3 years on, I think, gosh, I could have given so much more of my time, and I could have made a difference locally, as well as for my own career in the future.
Okay, thank you, Nicky. So I think one theme that permeates what everybody is saying is that working international, working for the UN, is not an area where you go because you want to rise to the top, because you want to be Secretary General, or you want to be some high-ranking official. It is because you're committed to the cause of the United Nations. As I mentioned earlier, I started quite low, and it was actually a time when I gave up a promotion. I was going to be promoted to another position in New York, but at the same time I had an opportunity to go to the field to work in the former Yugoslavia during the peacekeeping operations there, and I went for that instead. And some of my colleagues said, "You're crazy, you're giving up a promotion." A promotion in the UN is not an easy thing, it's not an automatic thing. You've got to compete, you've got to try many times. And in that context, I gave up the promotion because I wanted field experience, and I had been trying to get more. And this is, I'm coming to the end of my career in a few years, and looking back, I would actually want more field experience. And as Wasim rightly said, it is much easier to get this field experience in your early days of your career, when you don't have attachments, you don't have children, you may not have a spouse, you don't have aging parents. All this makes it a bit harder to work in the field because you have other considerations in your life. So it is very much recommended that you do try to work in the field, as we're all saying. I think in the interest of time, we may want to move to questions. Is that okay? I'll take some of the questions. We've touched on some of the issues that came up, but I'll take up some of the questions that have already been handed to me, and then we'll move on to questions from the floor. So I'll touch on some we partially answered. One question from Apoor Gupta, I think it's the order, I don't remember it. How many languages do you need to know to work for the UN? So it's sort of like, how long is a piece of string? I mean, it depends on the job. Many people, I mean, the more languages you know, the better. The more relevant the languages you know, the better, of course. But don't panic if you don't know more than one official language. We have a great example here. We just explained his background, where he went. He was head of a peacekeeping mission. So Ian is an example of a possibility of working through the system with one, which I would say, though, is the main language of the UN, English. So being very good at English is a very good start, because a lot of the communication, a lot of the documents, interactions are in English, but obviously not exclusively. What you need to do is look at the job openings, the vacancy announcements that we issue. It will always state what languages you need for that particular job. It will often say fluency in English required, knowledge of French desirable, or maybe English and French desired, or required. So it really depends on the job itself, and it depends on where the job is located. If the job is located in Santiago, it may say you need to know English and Spanish. If the job is located somewhere else, it may say English and Arabic. It really all depends on the job. But we do also need non-UN languages. We have 6 official languages. Beyond that, we sometimes need Portuguese speakers. We sometimes need Swahili speakers. We have radio programs in Swahili and in Portuguese. We do need speakers of languages locally, like Kurdish in Iraq, for example, northern Iraq, or Dari and Pashtun in Afghanistan. So for certain jobs, yes. But the more languages, especially the more international, or UN official languages you know, the more competitive you are. It may, in some cases, be a tiebreaker between yourself and another candidate, if you know more. But it's only one of many factors in deciding who to select. It is not the main factor unless you are going for a language job, like interpreter or translator. Of course, there you have to be very good. But as I said earlier, communication in the UN is very important. So you need to also be able to communicate with people with different levels of language knowledge, different ways of expressing themselves. I find in the UN, I don't know how the others feel, but I feel that we stop using metaphors, cliches, and so on in the UN. We sort of speak a more straightforward English, so it's clear to everybody what we mean, rather than being too abstract. Though we sometimes do write vague statements, but it's still, we try to avoid metaphors and so on. Anyway, that's that. Anybody want to add to that? Or fine. Okay, we have another question, Jake Middle has submitted. Does the UN provide grants or have programs for interns who come from poor families or developing countries? Now, in the UN Secretariat, unfortunately, the internship program is not funded. We have no funding from the General Assembly for it, and we're not likely to get any. So we're not able to pay interns in the Secretariat, whether it's in Beirut or Bangkok or Vienna or New York or wherever the duty station may be. Nevertheless, we do have interns from all over the world. Of course, they may be studying, not in their home country, but somewhere else. But in many cases, they are able to get support from either their university or another organization so that they can be interns even if they could not pay their own way on their own funding. There are some UN organizations that do provide financial support to interns, including ILO, for example, or IAEA, I think FAO, IFAD. So there are a few that actually do provide funding, but unfortunately, the Secretariat is not in a position to do so. Moving on to another question, Ben Warrington submitted. Okay, do you have to put your nationality to one side when working for the UN? Well, yes and no. I mean, of course, you don't lose your nationality, you maintain your nationality. You can support your football team. Watching the World Cup is a lot of fun in the UN because we have people from all over the world supporting their own team. So that's fine. But in the working for the UN, you have to think with the interests, as I was saying earlier, the interests of the UN in mind. You have to keep the interests of the UN, the Secretary General, and what the member states have mandated. That is what you're working for. You are an international civil servant. You always have to keep that in mind. You cannot work for your own national interests. So in that sense, you're keeping it aside. But in other senses, of course, you maintain your nationality, your national identity, your culture. We provide home leave so that you and your family can go to your home country every 2 years, normally, and maintain the ties with your culture, your country, and your family that you left in your home country. So it's depending on the context. But it's very important when you work for the UN that you don't sort of take obvious sides in a certain conflict, especially if the conflict involves your own country. That makes it very challenging sometimes. And when we send people on peacekeeping missions, there are certain backgrounds and nationalities that may not be able to work there because either they could be seen as being party to a conflict, or their lives could be in danger because of their background when they are working in that conflict area in peacekeeping. We had that in former Yugoslavia with the different groups there. So we have to be very aware of your background in that sense in certain contexts. I don't know if anybody wants to say more on that, but okay.
I'll just add to John that, I think being a football fan is great in the UN. Being an England football fan is not great in the UN. The last World Cup was miserable. I got invited to lots of games to watch in other missions. The German mission kept on inviting me and we kept on losing. So bear that in mind. And I think I've actually moved from being a member state at a point in my career, being a member state where you're passionately representing your member state's view and defending your member state's view, to being an international civil servant where you actually have to be neutral towards your member state and towards try and bring together everybody. The biggest thing it requires is you to be professional, basically. It's not that difficult. It requires a lot of empathy, it requires a lot of professionalism. If you take it with that kind of approach, it's very much doable.
Okay, so the next questions, they lend themselves to asking the panel. I'd like to ask the panel, one question. As a first-year student, this is from Sophie Cheney. As a first-year student, what things can I do now to improve my chances of getting a job at the UN? Any advice? Any of the panel members?
Well, it's exactly what I just said. I mean, even volunteering for a couple of hours a week does wonders. And being in a city like Edinburgh or in London, we have a real advantage of having loads of organisations. And it might not even just be internships. Don't look just for internships, look for volunteer positions, look for work experience positions. If you have the extra cash, language lessons would be excellent as well, as previously stated, but you've really got to keep your eyes and ears open, and don't be snobby about it, is the best way to put it as well. Everything you learn now will help you at some point. You will get valuable experience in anything you do, and it will look wonders when you come to your third year and you go, well, I've got a degree, and oh, I just so happen to fit all this in as well. And I think that's more impressive just for your career in general, not necessarily just for the United Nations. I think that's key.
So I just add one thing. If you're a first-year student, particularly if you're a first-year student, still keep your horizons open, because, you know, I think it's probably not healthy if you're a first-year student and you've got your career and your life fixated on joining the United Nations and becoming Assistant Secretary General for peacekeeping or something. I think you've got to work out what you really, really want to do in life. I'm still working that out, and I'm midway through my career. But I think I think, you know, even if you do get into the UN, you get into the Foreign Office, you get into a role, which can, from the outside seem very exciting. You still got to work out what's most of interest to you. So try and get. I think it fits in with volunteering. Try and get as much experience as you can, and try and work out what you can be really passionate about and where you might want to come back to later on in your life.
Yeah, I would just add as well, volunteering obviously is very, very useful, and I would definitely say to find things to volunteer for. I would also say try and get skills that you can get and get paid for them, because obviously you're all students and your students are always in need of money. You've got long summers. In the summers when I was at university, I used to work in the oil industry because they paid well and they gave excellent experience, and I was just filing all day, or the next summer I was just taking phone calls all day. But these are jobs that you can get paid for, and it gets you good experience which you can then bring to the sector that maybe doesn't have the money to train you in these kinds of basic admin roles and admin experience.
Thanks, Ian. I think
excellent advice. The only thing to add is get yourself into multinational contexts. Now, probably you do. You're in one now, certainly, and maybe that's true in most of your university lives. But just occasionally these days, I find myself in a room that is full of British people only. This is very odd. Because first at Amnesty and then in the UN, I've worked for 30 years entirely with multinational groups of people. And firstly, that's wonderful and stimulating. I can't imagine going back to a nationally and culturally confined group, like the foreigners. But clearly, if your interest is international, then from early on, you want to expose yourself to the kind of people who you want to work with as colleagues.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question for the panel. What is the one factor, personal skill, language, communication, etc., that has helped you most in your career? Submitted by Ethan McLaughlin. Who would like to start? What factor has helped you most in your career? More experience.
I've already quoted Woody Allen today. Turning up. 90% of life is about turning up. But to be a little less flippant, not being over-focused on career. Being ready to jump at something that you hadn't necessarily thought of because you see its value and its usefulness and what you can contribute.
Thank you.
I think I'd echo some of those. So, not overly planning where you're going to go. So look at how you build up the skills and work out what the opportunities are going to be. And I think the kind of skills that, having worked in different kinds of organisations, there are some skills that work across those organisations and they're really important. Skills like being able to work with people in a team context. once you start working, you'll realise there are a lot of people who can't work in teams. So if you've got those skills, you've already got a skill that a lot of people are lacking. So being able to work in teams is incredible. Being able to understand other people's perspectives and being empathetic is an incredibly important skill if you're working in an international context. Being able to think beyond just your task, starting to think strategically about a situation, bringing a wide perspective to an issue is an incredibly important skill as well. So think about experiences. I'm saying experiences, not necessarily jobs, that can help you build up some of those skills, and that will get you quite well.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add?
I would just say introspection, just really taking stock of your own skills and being able to sell them when you're talking to people in job interviews or anything. And also being very aware of your weaknesses and how you might be able to improve them. I think that's just introspection and really being self-critical, but not overly so, would be a good skill to have as well.
Nicky, anything?
You've got to be in it to win it. I know far too many people who just won't bother applying to half the things they want to do because they straight away go, I won't get it. And I think that's really key. You've got to be gutsy, you've got to put yourself out there. If you're nervous about applications or cover letters, or you don't think you've got good enough skills, ask friends, ask tutors. That's what your tutors are there for. They're there for career advice as well as academic advice. You've really just got to put yourself out there because things don't fall on your lap. You've got to meet people and you've got to get the experience.
Yeah, I think all the panel members gave very relevant and very good advice on this issue. And it's important, as I was saying earlier, also to establish a good reputation for being somebody who's reliable, who can get the work done, and also, as you're saying, be self-aware. Work on your skills, your weaknesses, and so on. And be seen to be doing so. Moving to the next question for the panel. This is from Rita Rashid. What are the right/wrong motivations for working in the UN? Are there any misconceptions about a job in the UN? So, who would like to start? It's a two-part question.
Okay.
The right or wrong motivations.
I can give you some wrong motivations. So if you're interested in, if you're mainly motivated by money, then the UN probably isn't the right place for you to work. I think the package probably at the UN, when you're looking at it now, probably looks quite good, but that's not the right motivation for working in the UN. There's lots of other benefits to working at the UN if you're interested in getting your kids into an international school, but that's not the right motivation for working in the UN either. I think the right motivation is to do something. If you're passionate about, I've said this word a number of times, but if it's something that excites you, working on a certain issue, or working on an international issue, then that's a good reason to be working with it. If it really excites you to work with colleagues from across the world, then that's a really good reason to be working with you. I think he was right making fun of the Foreign Office. It was a big culture shock for me coming back from the UN, working for 193 member states, and coming back to the Foreign Office for the last couple of years, working primarily with people from the UK. But if you really enjoy that international context, and a lot of you get a taste of that, you probably get your first taste of that at university, and you want more of that, then that's a good motivation for thinking of an international career as well. And if you want to change the world, then work for the UN.
Yeah, anything?
Good answers.
I just want to add, my experience, I was one of 20 interns, and it was blindingly obvious from people's attitudes and the way they worked, who were there for the right reasons and who were there for the wrong. People were there who would just sit there and go, great, I made it, this is me. And if you're just looking to be the UN just for the sake of being the UN, you're going to sink, because you're not going to be motivated, you're not going to be passionate, and it's obvious to everyone around you. The interns who were there for the right reasons were putting themselves forward for more things, always looking for more work, always looking to engage, and always just genuinely passionate about all sorts of global issues going on. And you work with, you're not just an intern and it's your manager, these are people, and you build relationships with them. And if you're a passionate person, it's going to go down somewhere in the system. Someone's going to remember, yes, they were great, they were really on it with the Philippines, and they're really inspired by UNICEF. If you're just looking there just for the prestige, it will show, and you then wake up one day and go, why hasn't my career gone anywhere? You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to think, what do I want out of a career?
Well, Nicky, yes, it's an excellent answer, because that is so true. you've got to believe in the mission of the UN and want to be part of this organization. You know, do something that is beyond your own scope and your own immediate desires, whether it's money or something else. You really have to show that you are willing to partly sacrifice, but also work hard for the UN. I think we have a bit of time for questions from the audience. So, anybody like to ask a question from the audience? Let's see, back there, please, in the red. Oh, okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Margaret. I'm 4th year integration student in university.
Please hold the microphone close.
Sorry,
yeah, thanks.
yeah, it's actually working now. Great. I didn't believe it was. My name is Margaret, and I am 4th year integration student here at the University of Edinburgh. Thank you so much for a great panel. It's been really, really useful. I have some questions in terms of the internship position, and I was wondering if you could please give me some information about how the day of an intern would be. Not the nitty-gritty details, but do you do quite a lot of shadowing, or is it more attendance work in terms of different working places?
I think Nicky is well qualified to answer this one.
Well, I can tell you exactly what I did, but there are internship positions throughout the UN and everything does differently. The position I was in was a communications role. It's the United Nations Regional Information Centre for Western Europe. And I was working for the UK and Ireland desk, so I was engaging with UN content and sort of promoting it to UK and Irish stakeholders. But on top of it, as sort of a side project, the office also ran a cinema event where we'd host some excellent movies and we'll have the director come and UN experts to debate about these issues. But that is quite an exception for that organisation. It was something we started rolling just to engage the public. So everywhere is absolutely unique. And when you're looking for an internship in general, look at skills you think you can build on, the skills you want to get. If you're looking at something and go, oh yes, I love UNICEF, but then the only position is a fundraising intern, you think, oh, but I really want a research position. Look elsewhere for research positions and get the skills. If you know what kind of general area of expertise you want, look for that, because the UN might not have it, but it might be somewhere else, and you could always bring it back to the UN.
And to add to that, as Nicky rightly said, every office is different, every internship is a little bit different, of course. We're looking for motivated candidates, and we try to give them meaningful assignments so they can grow. They can also relate it to their academic work. The internships are from 2 to 6 months, and it's a great way to get to know the UN from the inside. What is it like on a daily basis? How do they interact? What do we do? So you gain a lot of knowledge about the UN while being given a certain project or assignment to do. It's not, it shouldn't be, at least it's not photocopying and shredding papers. Not at all. It is something that where you can do research, you can work together with the professionals under their supervision on certain projects and activities. So you're following meetings, taking notes in meetings, putting together reports of meetings, all kinds of things like that. Thank you. Okay, next was did you have a question?
Yeah, can I just ask?
Easier to microphone. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So everybody can hear your question.
Once again, thank you very much for answering all of our questions. I just have a quick question about volunteering, because what I've heard usually is that it's usually you go somewhere for, let's say, 12 months, and you take nice pictures and show it back home, and then that's it, and then you go and continue your life as normal. And I was just thinking, does volunteering really make a difference? And if it does, do you think some kind of education should be integrated into volunteering so that we don't just run there without knowing what we're actually doing? And does UN provide this kind of education for those who are volunteering? Thank you.
I don't know, Pierre, would you like to answer this one?
I mean, UN volunteers certainly don't just go somewhere for a year and sit around not doing anything. I mean, the UN volunteer program is a means of recruiting people who work as professionals in whatever bit of the UN they're working in. Of course, the effective use of personnel, depends upon the nature of the management of whatever bit of any organisation you're working in, and the quality of the experience will always vary. The quality of induction and training, the quality of onward career advice, that I'm afraid has always going to vary. You may come across very good managers and human resource advisors, or have a more negative experience. But certainly volunteering in the UN is a professional and professionally managed service.
So Ian was giving you the UN context. What we call a UN volunteer is a paid position, and you're doing what UN staff do. You're just in a different category.
Stipend, you better explain.
Yeah, it's an allowance. It's enough to keep you alive and in the duty station. You won't starve, and you will have a place to live. But you won't get rich.
Where you can't even spend it, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, very true. You have to save. You're forced to save because you can spend it in the duty station. But it is quite a bit less than what you get for doing the same thing as a UN staff. So you have to be aware. But it is paid, first of all. Secondly, as Ian rightly said, it is not an idle time. It is a very busy time because it's always in the field. The field, by definition, practically keeps you busy. It is, And if you talk about other kinds of volunteering, we can't really speak to that. But I know you were saying, there's volunteering in other NGOs or other contexts also. You were asking also what happens after the volunteer period. Well, that you can leverage as experience. If you have been a UN volunteer, that is definitely a great advantage if later on you want to work in the UN. Even in a different context, different duty station, but having had that experience is, for us, it gives you a real advantage because you have field experience, you have UN experience, and you will be a good candidate on that basis. Okay, moving on, let's say in the back with the glasses, there, the man in the suit.
So, hi, I'm Dheeraj from University of Strathclyde. I take this risk of asking a slightly negative question on this pool of ambitious individual, but it's just to get a good flavor of the reality index. How many people do you think, after joining the UN, really opt out? And what are the compelling reasons why they do so? And second small question would be, you said that there is a good opportunity for people landing at fields. So what are the, I'm sure situations there are not so comforting, but what are the safety measures taken by UN in order to accommodate those concerns? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
I think the situation on fields will certainly not be very comforting. In fact, there's situations on field when
field situations.
Field.
But you're about security or living conditions?
Maybe security rather, so security and safety conditions.
Okay. Ian, would you like to start?
Well, on the question of security conditions, of course, they vary hugely, and to some extent I kind of illustrated that. And what's worse, I'm afraid, is that whereas to some extent working for the UN, like working for the Red Cross, would have been regarded as something that was respected and almost protected you from threat. These days the UN is a target even away from the most threatening security contexts like Kabul or Baghdad. So that's a very unhappy reality. But of course, along with that has gone an increasingly professional attention to security advice, security precautions, and security measures. So there's good and bad, as it were, but one must always have one's eyes open to what degree of risk you're prepared to live with in order to do something that's useful. But you can go out of here and get run over tonight. So without having done anything useful. So that's now. The first part of the question was really related to kind of turnover of UN staff, I think, and how many people kind of quit the UN because they're not satisfied and disillusioned. And John, you can speak better about that than I can. I mean, it's probably both true that the UN loses some people, but it's a pity it loses because they don't feel that they found their way into the roles that motivate them as much as they hope. And it's certainly true that the United Nations keeps some people one might have been happy to see moved on. But that's true of other organisations too. John,
yeah, thank you. Yes, absolutely true what Ian is saying, both about security and retention. Taking the people who come through the exam system, for example, the exam is designed for people to come on board and have a career in the UN, in various duty stations and long-term. I find that in the first 2 to 5 years of that professional career in the UN, people's minds are still churning, should I stay, should I leave, you know, what should I do, is this for me or is it not for me? Once you've gone beyond the 5-year threshold, you are likely to stay unless you commit a major crime and you are, you know, terminated in the UN. Not as physically, but, you know, your contract is terminated. But once you are into this fascinating international, multicultural, and, you know, global organization, sometimes it's very difficult to leave. And as Ian rightly said, some have brilliant careers, they do very well for long term. Some may not do so well, and we'd be happier to let them go. It's not always that easy. We often joke it's difficult to get in and difficult to get out. Once you're in, it's often difficult because the work and the context and the duty station can be fascinating. But also, you know, just you get used to all the, you know, the atmosphere, and you appreciate it, and you like having colleagues from all over the world. But everybody's career is different in the UN. There's no one way to have a career in the UN. And people may come for a short-term assignment, some people may just work in the field and leave and do something else. We have people come from the private sector, we ask them, well, you were earning 3 times as much as your current salary, why did you join us? No, you're losing so much in money. And what they always say is that life is not just about making money. I wanted to do something, you know, more meaningful. That is the answer we get from people like that. And we know that they earn a lot more before they join us. So, you know, it varies a lot. It's hard to say. We sometimes do surveys about it. And it's not the money that motivates people, it's really working for the UN. And if they're demotivated, they should not stay. I mean, they should really find something else to do.
Can I just add to that? While working at the UN, you know, I spent some time looking at human resource policy and looked at things like churn. And any kind of healthy organisation kind of has churn, unless it's kind of in a state-run socialist economy. So any kind of organisation should have some churn. You want people coming in, you want with fresh ideas, you want people leaving. If anything, among the kind of professional staff of the UN, the churn was probably lower than you might want in an organisation. That's partly because I think people, once they join, and as was said, work in this international environment and work on these kind of issues, find it difficult to think of other areas that will give them a similar level of motivation.
It's also difficult sometimes to go back to your home country if you spend time in the international arena outside your home country. You know, your marketability, your contacts diminish, and so on. That's another factor why people might stay in the UN. We have a bit of time, one or two more questions. Let's see. I should move to the back. Oh, okay. In the back, yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Ale. I work with the NHS head office in London, and I'm also a part-time student at Hull International Business School. It's quite good on the FT ranking list, so I know that, and I studied at King's actually, so I know that to get the best candidates or the best people for jobs, you know, you have to be competitive. You've got to get them from good universities. But we touched upon sort of scholarships a little bit, and to be honest, I wasn't really quite happy with the answer in terms of how the UN could defend itself against accusations of being accessible to people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Because unless you can afford to take a trip to one of these field places for 12 months, it looks like to me like a career is quite hard to you. And there are, you know, really passionate people from those socioeconomic backgrounds. So it would be remiss of me not to speak up on their behalf and ask, you know, we have the sort of head from HR on UN here, and lobby him perhaps as to say, what can the UN do better to encourage these people to apply and to have a career in the UN? Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think I'd like to answer because I think you may have misunderstood various categories of personnel. The ones that are not paid are the interns. They only stay for 2 months, up to 6 months. It's their own choice to come to the UN. They realize from the beginning that they will not be paid. The 12 months in the field, that is paid. The volunteers, and of course the staff, obviously, but volunteers are paid. They are paid enough to be able to live in that duty station. So I hope you're not confusing two things. And we pay for them to travel to that duty station. Not the interns, but the volunteers and the staff are compensated for traveling to that duty station. Does that clarify the issue? Yeah. Or did I misunderstand your question?
Sorry. Yeah, even though, even the volunteers for just 2 months or 4 months, unless they can afford to travel to Brussels or whatever to fund themselves, because you're not paying. I know the difference between 12 months and 2 months one, but even if you just look at people that can afford to, take those vacations or be in those circles to meet those and have those opportunities, to my mind, I mean, and we can agree to this.
Okay. We're not talking about volunteers, we're talking about interns in this case. Just to be clear about the terminology. Volunteers are something totally different. Interns are not paid, and that they know in advance. And that is based on the General Assembly. That's nothing the Office of Human Resources Management can do anything about. You'd have to lobby the member states sitting next to me whether they can give us some funding for interns, and very unlikely to happen. So that's the reality we have to live with. And I address interns 3 or 4 times a year. And whenever one of them raises his hand or her hand and says, we want to be paid, everybody claps. But of course, they knew in advance that this was the situation. As I said earlier, many of them are able to get stipends or support from their university. And we do have interns from all over the world, because the General Assembly gets a report detailing where these interns come from. So they are definitely from every region of the world. So it is not limited to nationals of countries that can afford to be interns.
Can I just add to John? I'll defend John, because everything that's wrong with the UN's HR policy is actually not the UN's fault. It's our fault. It's the member states' fault. And the basic issue is you've got to get 193 countries to agree to how to run this organisation, and that's really difficult. So if you take that, I mean, delving into that example, so if you're talking about bringing in people from different social, economic backgrounds to the UN, how do you compare a socio-economic background in the UK to one in India or to one in Nigeria? It's really, really difficult. And getting agreement around those things is next to impossible, and getting agreement around how you get from each of these places and how they're going to be funded is even harder. So there's not necessarily the answer, but there is part of the reason behind why some of these things are not more easy and perhaps not as good as they perhaps could be.
Can I just quickly add, at UNRWA we had interns from all over Western Europe, and I was the only one who wasn't funded by my state or university. I was very privileged enough that I could afford to go away for 4 months. And I completely agree with you. I did 3 unpaid internships, and it's because I could afford to stay at home with my parents to progress my career. And unfortunately, that's the state it is in the UK. But universities, depending on what university you are, some of them will be happy enough to fund you to do internships. So it's up to you to go back to your respective countries, your respective universities, go straight to them and go, what funding, what scholarships can I get? And unfortunately at the minute, that's the only most proactive advice I can give to you, is go directly to university and see, is there any way you're going to get any money if you defer a year to do an internship?
Okay, thank you. How are we doing for time, Rich? I think we're time's up, unfortunately. Now, I know you have some additional questions. Maybe you will be able to ask them during the next session. So there's still time to ask questions from the audience. Thank you very much to the panel for being with us and helping us understand.
Yes, well, thank you very much to the entire panel. Thank you to you, John, for sharing that. The discussion I found inspirational, but also there's some real meat that we do need to drill down to. If you do have a burning question, which I know a lot of you do, please tweet it or pop it in one of our boxes. They're still there. We're not going to collect them until the end of the break. So make sure that I am asking those questions. We're going to take a short half-hour refreshment break. You'll be pleased to hear those coffee and tea replenished at the back. And we will reconvene